Garen Emig, along with Bill Haisten, Tulsa World sports columnist, here to dive back into basketball season. Even with all three Oklahoma teams out of the tournament, Bill, there is plenty to talk about with the Sooners needing a coach since we last talked, Lon Kruger having retired late last week, Tulsa having decided to keep Frank Haith as basketball coach since we last talked, and continued wait and see mode in terms of the anticipated either raises and or extensions for the other two guys, Paul Mills at ORU and Mike Boynton at Oklahoma State. Of those four situations, which is most interesting to you this morning?
Oh, wow. Most interesting. Well, I mean, the OU job is, I'll be really interested to see what direction Joe Castiglione goes with that job. And if, because the most, when I networked the other day with wise guys who know basketball,
right,
give me some names on who to watch for the OU job. And you get kind of the predictable mid-major guys like Henson at San Antonio and the guy at North Texas,
Grant McCaslin.
And but you also keep in mind that OU that Lon was one of the 20 highest paid guys in the country, and that you, with the right person, will spend
exactly
level on basketball, Garen, which opens the door to infinite possibilities, right? So I'm really super fascinated to see where Joe goes with that search. I think it's imminent, and by that I mean even this week possible at Oklahoma State for an extension and a raise to be announced for Mike Boynton, which is a no-brainer. By $500,000, the lowest paid guy in the conference. So it's time to step up. In fact, at the end of his current contract, if I remember right, Garen, he would still be making less than Travis Ford made in Travis's final year at OSU. So it's time to pay the man. It's time to quit being cheap on the basketball side of the athletic department. And they tried that with Brad Underwood, and that didn't work out well. And then now they've gotten pretty damn good results from a coach who's by far the lowest paid in the league. So it's time to pay him and extend him and and move on and hope you can keep him. But at the very least, you're not going to keep him if you don't make him feel very welcome and pay the man.
Tulsa decided to extend Frank Haith late last week. You have written quite a bit about that situation. You wrote a compelling column about a month ago, it was, that compared where Haith has taken TU to his predecessor, Doug Wojcik. And a lot of people, I think, read that as a sort of the writing is on the wall type of situation. Why would it be any different for Haith than it was at the end of Wojcik's run? It turned out to be different. And so the obvious question is, how big a surprise is that to you? And was that news to you?
As whatever the process was, what was it, 3 weeks since Tulsa's played? I don't know if it was an everyday discussion, examination of Frank's 7 seasons. I don't know. But it felt like to me, the longer it went on, Garen, that the more likely it was that they were going to extend him, because when I talked to some TU people 6 weeks ago, there was this agreement that whatever happens, you've got to happen pretty immediately after the season ends for the sake of recruiting, right? And you don't want to tread water out there without a coach at this time of year, because you got a signing day coming up in a couple of weeks or a few days. So when it dragged on as it did, the surprise became less. And still, yet when the announcement came down Friday, I was still a little surprised. First of all, I was amused by the timing of it to release it 24 hours before Oral Roberts plays in the Sweet 16. And my thought was, you can't wait until Tuesday or Wednesday next week to do this. But I don't think TU gives half a crap about what's going on at Oral Roberts. And in fact,
they might want to start.
Oh, no doubt. And you did a great job of writing on that for the Monday paper. That I got to say this right quick. Your Buki column was so good. My favorite in a while, of in the paper, my favorite football piece in a while. And then the Lon Kruger piece she did was great. But what she wrote today was really interesting. And I think what you were doing was kind of speaking for a lot of people because, I mean, I've gotten a lot of text messages along those lines that, you know, as ORU got all this national praise, publicity, and Stephen A. Smith's bragging about them, and they're on live with Scott Van Pelt. You know, this is like heady stuff for ORU now. This is unprecedented.
Right.
And it's happening at a time when the energy at Tulsa within the Tulsa basketball program is zero. It's dead over there. And you know, apparently there's a roster, pretty extensive roster overhaul,
right.
You know, so yeah, I mean, I think too, though, Garen, that when they fired Doug Wojcik 9 years ago, the university's finances were in a lot different place than they are today. And as Frank himself said when he was asked about Kelly after the final game of the season, you know, he said, Frank, I'm paraphrasing the heck out of this, but he basically said, you're going to fire a guy in a COVID season. So I think that was probably a factor too. So, but with regard to the way the second half of the season went, it was really dismal. And it was, and this came, you know, they beat Houston, Garen, they beat Houston and Cincinnati, and they went to Florida and won beautifully.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I wrote about it. I said, this may be the best Tulsa team since 2003. And they're trending that way. And they were at that time. And that very day I wrote that, they went to Wichita and got hammered and just never recovered. So Frank Haith, survive in advance, man. He got an extension, and here he goes into year number 8.
Yeah, yes or no? Is Paul Mills the ORU coach next year?
Well, yeah, I think so because okay, so he's a hot darling of a mid-major.
Right.
Okay, where was he 8 games ago? I can tell you where he was. He was 50-65 at ORU before this win streak that ended Saturday. Before they won 7 in a row, before the Arkansas game, Paul's record was 50-65 at ORU. Now, I had seen them enough to know that they were trending in a good direction, and I know how they played against Oklahoma State, Wichita, Arkansas, OU during this regular season, and they've really closed the gap from or they've gotten a lot better than they were these first couple of years with Paul. No doubt he's building something nice, and he found 2 absolute gems in Texas recruiting with Asmus and O'Banner, guys that not very many other people were even aware of, much less, you know, in pursuit of. So Paul Mills is a stud, and he will be a guy that will get a bigger investment somewhere. I just don't know if this year is that year. And some school may in 5 years say, you know, I wish we had hired Paul Mills when he was available and inexpensive, because at some point he's going to be in demand and commanding a lot of money. But I think Paul Mills is on the brink of, but not ready to kick the door down for a Power 5 job. Not quite yet.
Let's finish where we began. Back to OU for just a second. I can't let this go because there's a chance when we do this next week, OU will have found its guy and we won't be able to have a lot of fun with possible names. How about this for a dark horse? How about Frank Martin for Oklahoma? Guy who is pretty miserable, I think, right now at South Carolina. That's not a good job, by the way. For those who worry about Boynton going back to his alma mater.
Right.
OSU fans, I wouldn't. I just don't think that's a very good job. And Martin's finding out, even though he took the Gamecocks to the Final Four a few years ago. Interesting guy. That's not a home run. It's not a guy you take to the press conference and say, "Here's our, you know, this is our next Lon Kruger." But I think that's sitting Power 5 head coach who knows the region, obviously having done what he did at Kansas State, could do worse if you were Joe C. And I'm not sure he's in position to take the mid-major route that he once did when he took a chance on Jeff Capel, right? And we threw McCaslin's name out as a possibility. We'll see. But you got a guy like Martin that would be fun to consider.
Hey, Garen, when Coach Martin was at K-State, in those years, you and I both were doing beat work at the time.
Right.
And so I was pretty frequently on the Big 12 teleconference, and the highlight of the call every week was Frank Martin, who could make millions doing voice work if he wanted to.
That's right. That's right.
Great voices. And I loved his candor. Really tough. I mean, really a tough guy, but reasonably tough. Never, I don't know. He never felt like a bully. I thought he was fascinating. He's one of the most fascinating guys in the history of the Big 12 in basketball.
His players called him Frank, and that never happened. How often do you hear basketball players call or athletes, college athletes, call their coach by their first name? They refer to him as Frank.
Yeah, well, that's common in the NBA, but not in college basketball.
No, I thought that was really cool.
Right. I forgot to turn on my light. I'm so sorry. Here we go.
You look fine.
Anyway, Patrick Prince will lecture me about lights.
Yeah. So who's your? Speaking of light and dark, who's your dark horse? Do you have a dark horse guy in that derby?
In the
OU? Yeah. Any names that we ought to? I know that a mutual.
White.
Who?
Quantus White.
Okay, Kelvin's assistant down at Houston. Okay,
and a really sweet guy who was a really, really tremendous but underrated player for the Final Four Sooners. Good grief. Holy moly, Garen, that was 19 years ago.
Yeah, crazy.
Quantus is a really highly regarded guy in the business. So there's a name for you.
I know others are throwing out Hollis, who's down on Kelvin's staff. Hollis Price, Quantus's backcourt mate, and even Kellen Sampson, I think, has gotten a little run, hasn't he?
I think Kellen is the
he's the successor.
I think there's a handshake. I don't know if it's on paper, but I think there's a handshake agreement that Kelvin's successor is Kellen.
It will be, but who's to keep Kellen from getting a little, if there was an interest on Joe C's behalf, right. Taking a swing at being a head coach at a Power 5 in case the Houston folks needed to see that before he automatically inherited the Cougars from his dad. But that would be fascinating.
I do wish that Kelvin were 55 instead of 65, because I think at 55, Kelvin, knowing him like I do, and you know him, I think he would believe that he's the guy who could go to UT and take them to the ultimate level. I think
Texas job.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We could have spent 10 minutes on that job.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
That's all sorts of interesting, isn't it? And it makes OU's situation interesting because all of a sudden Castiglione's out there fishing from the same pond potentially as his buddy Chris Del Conte. So
well, and just here I am saying I don't think Paul Mills is ready quite today.
Yeah.
But who knows what dominoes will fall after OU and Texas.
That's right.
They're guys, and so never say never. And of course, Paul Mills today is in a completely different place personally, and so is his program than they were, just 10 days ago. So
say Joe picks off McCaslin. Doesn't UNT call another former Baylor assistant, which is who McCaslin was, right? When once upon a time, I assume UNT calls Paul Mills.
Well, and UNT athletic director Ren Baker is massively connected in Tulsa.
Yeah,
and an Oklahoma State guy who just is still to this day. For that matter, Ren and I correspond all the time.
Yeah,
I mean, he's very aware of what's happening up here, and he's got ORU ties. So now that you're kind of cornering me into thinking about this. If UNT opens, you kind of, if you're ORU, it might be looking
then you start to worry for sure. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see what's happened when we get together again next week. Maybe instead of all the speculation, we'll have just reaction to whatever news breaks regarding this crazy silly season known as the college basketball coaching carousel. Have a good week, Bill. Good talking.
I think, Aaron, I think we'll be. The one thing I think we can expect is that we will hail Gonzaga for being the first undefeated perfect season national champion since Indiana in '76. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, Lord only knows what we'll talk about next week. I mean,
all right.
For real. I mean, has this not been the most unpredictable, crazy last few days? I mean,
maybe even some spring football into our conversation next week.
Yeah.
This being Oklahoma and all. So,
Yeah,
all right, keep reading us, keep watching us. For Bill, this is Garen. Have a good week, folks.